Good afternoon, Guyana, and welcome to another edition of Conversations in State. Fortunately, this is our first edition of Conversations in State for the year 2018. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you so very much for joining us. Just to remind you that this program aims to let you know about, give information actually, and the work of all of those agencies, departments, and organizations that function and fall within the Ministry of the Presidency. Today, it is my pleasure to be focusing on the Department of Climate Change for the first time on this program. And I'd like to welcome to the program the head of the Department of Climate Change, Ms. Janelle Christian. Welcome.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Great, great to have you. Let's first off talk about climate change. What is happening with climate change? What is the Department of Climate Change doing for Guyana at this present time?
Okay, just a little correction. It is the Office of Climate Change, and we have been involved in quite a lot. We have been quite busy. And just to give you a broad overview of what we have been up to over the last 2 years, we were quite fortunate to have received quite a lot of support from our development partners, and in that effort, we were fortunate to also work with the Caribbean Development Bank, and specifically the work with the Caribbean Development Bank is to support the government's initiative to articulate national climate change policy, the National Climate Change Communication Strategy and Plan, and the 5 year strategic plan for the Office of Climate Change. We would have also benefited under the support of the Caribbean Development Bank. They hosted in the latter part of 2017 a regional conference to build the capacity of technical officers with respect to preparation of project proposals and project idea notes for submission to the Green Climate Fund. Another critical partner within CARICOM that we have worked with is the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, and we're particularly grateful for the support, unwavering support that we continue to receive from this agency. Principally, they have facilitated, and Guyana is one of the first countries within CARICOM to benefit under the Green Climate Fund's readiness support. And so, with working with 5Cs over the last year, we are working to strengthen the NDA, which is a National Designated Authority. It is the mechanism under which the Green Climate Fund interact with countries. And for Guyana, since the Office of Climate Change falls under the purview of the Minister of State, he serves as the NDA. And under this initiative, we would have elaborated the country work program. In fact, last week we hosted a final workshop, and the country work program will include the profile of priority projects that we would want to submit to the GCF for financing. The Caribbean Community Climate Change Center also mobilized resources to support the government's vision for Bartica, to become the first model green town. And this financing specifically came from the Italian government, 650,000 US dollars, and this resource is going to be used to conduct a number of baseline studies for the community of Bartica. We have been working with the FAO, UN FAO, and specifically the area of support with the FAO is to access the GCF support to provide some studies, undertake studies for the agriculture sector. We know most of our fertile land is based on the coast. Most of our agriculture activities are on the coast. Our coast is below sea level. Inherently, that is, notwithstanding climate change, we are below sea level, and it is subject to greater threat as a result of sea level rise from the resultant impact of climate change. So the FAO last year submitted a readiness support to the GCF. They fielded a mission to Guyana. Their technical team worked with all of the subsectors under the Ministry of Agriculture to put together a readiness proposal. We have since submitted that to the GCF, and the FAO has also committed its own resources to conduct the baseline studies, feasibility studies, which will then inform a full proposal to address particular climate challenges within the agriculture sector. I can go on.
Before you do, certainly a mouthful, and I do
Yes.
appreciate that as much as the viewers would appreciate that. Do you find that with all of this that's happening, because you just gave a lot of
Yes.
information, do you find, because again, climate change is an issue not only for Guyana but for the world over.
Correct.
We can't control weather patterns and so on, but we
Correct.
can prepare
Mm-hmm.
for, any possible disaster that would come from those. Even though this is so, it's not like a bread and butter issue that people have gotten accustomed to talking about and dealing with every day. Do you find that the Office of Climate Change has placed itself in a position whereby enough information on what the office is actually doing is being put out there in terms of preparing residents and citizens for negatives and positives of climate change?
Correct. We are not there yet. In fact, it was for that very reason that a unit or department within the office was established specifically for communication,
Okay.
because we realized that oftentimes the technical people speak the technocrats and all of these language,
Yeah.
and it's above the head of the people. And the impacts of climate change, we're already experiencing those challenges, and so we thought that it was important for us to craft messages for various sectors um, that would really speak to their interests.
Yeah.
And so, in that regard, last year, with support, we're also working with UNDP,
Mm-hmm.
and this is principally on the regional project which is financed by the government of Japan. It's called the Japan Caribbean Climate Change Partnership. And specifically under that initiative, they would have conducted a survey to get a perception of the public with respect to climate change and its challenges and what they think about it. We would have covered four regions 5, 4, 7, and 9. And it's quite interesting depending on which part of the country you're from. And out of that, we also wanted content that Guyanese can relate to. So out of that, we would have done a video, Siege on My Land, and which speaks specifically to our challenges with climate change. It has farmers, regular household individuals, school children speaking to the impacts of climate change, and also some historical context, specifically our 2005 floods. And to support that, we have also produced two posters which we want to distribute to the schools, that looks at climate change and its impacts on the coast and on the hinterland, and what we can do to adapt to these projected changes, and also what we're already experiencing.
Do you find that in doing all of that and reaching out, do you find that they're either whether they're in the state of mind already to deal with what the Office of Climate Change is doing and how it will affect them, or are they easy to get into that state of mind?
And the interesting thing is that, as I said, when you speak to those that are not in the sector, specifically this being part of their work, the people can tell you about the changes that they have seen. So, it's about making that connection to what you're experiencing, because we've all can put our finger to the changes that we're seeing in our rain pattern, rainfall, the intensity.
Yeah.
We can all put our finger on how frequently we're now having floods. We can put our finger to the issues regarding how hot we feel sometimes during the night or day. And these are all the projections and the impacts that we already experience. And they talk about in more intense rainfall, increased temperatures, more nights being hot, and we're already experiencing those things. But too often we don't put our finger on it. And so when you start having this conversation, then people can tell you that indeed this
Yes.
is so. In particular, the work that was done last year, we talk about saline intrusion and the influence of the ocean on
Yeah.
the fresh water in our rivers, and the farmers will tell you that during the extended dry season, the salt water backs up further up the river. So they previously could have gotten irrigation water from the river, but depending on what's happening, it
You can't do
does
that
not
anymore.
exactly, because what they're extracting is salt water. So we're seeing those things already, but you are correct. We need to now put it in the language and have more content available so we can speak to these things. When you go into the hinterland, they will tell you the same thing. And so we want to ensure that we communicate more what is happening in simple terms, depending on the audience that we're interacting with. We want to ensure that school age children can understand what is happening, know what are the implications based on the climate models and the scenarios for Guyana. Um, and we need to now make the connection outside of the traditional sector, because we always think about
Exactly.
flood and rain and agriculture, but these things also have an implication on health with vector-borne diseases. We would have seen over the last 2 years or so, um, more and more new mosquito-borne diseases that we've never heard about before,
Exactly.
because they say now these things, because of the temperature change, places that certain mosquitoes could not thrive before are now found in those areas, and with that come, certain diseases. There's also the whole issue of heat stress. Most times when we talk about heat stress, we think about what happens during the summer period in the temperate countries like the US and so on, where people die as a result of extreme heat. But it is something that we also need to start thinking about, and how it affects the vulnerable, like children and the older people. So we need to look outside of the traditional to see how climate change is affecting our lives. Um, yes, there is need for more country-specific research, for us to do more observations and investigations into certain things, because unless we do, we really would not know. We'd be guessing.
As a country, and of course again your office, is the, or I should say, are the resources available to do that sort of research, whether human or other resources that you may need to do successful research?
Yes, there is. The interesting thing is, we don't want to be dependent, but under the international framework, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that process mandates developed countries to make resources available to developing countries such as ours, which are disproportionately affected by a problem that we did not cause. And
Yes.
so, under those initiatives, there's support for universities, individuals, governments to undertake specific research, to conduct the climate vulnerability assessment for specific sector, to understand what would be the impact based on the scenario. So they are support. The question is whether we tap into those opportunities. Sometimes we don't aggressively take advantage of the opportunities that are available, and also on the side of government, because climate change is a development challenge. So even with respect to government, in our designs of our homes, designs of our roads, we have to ensure that we incorporate the projected impacts as a result of climate change. You hear them talk about resilient infrastructure. So when we're building our roads, when we're building our schools, when we're building our homes, we have to ensure that they are resilient. That is, what does that mean? That we can withstand whatever comes,
Comes, yeah.
and not just what we have experienced, but what is projected to come. Because I know our benchmark would have been 2005 in terms of the
The
flood,
flooding, yeah.
the height of the flood waters, but we should not only build with that in mind, because they're saying, you may have one in 100 year um, phenomena, and so it may very well be beyond what we would have experienced in our lifetime. And so these are the things that we have to consider, and that is why research is important, because it will help us to make informed decisions, and also help us to safeguard ourselves against these risks when they do occur.
All of this is really great. And we have to think about the fact that you and I and those older than us will get older. So that leaves the younger generation in the schools. I was reading about the offices spearheading a green agenda sessions in schools. Explain.
Okay. Last year, as I said, we have a new department that is specifically responsible with developing content for communication, and we target various segments of society. And so last year, we we would have um, undertaken a school outreach and education awareness program across, I believe it was four regions: regions 6, region 4, region 5, region 10. And specifically, and we also partner with, we believe that young people should engage other young people.
Yeah.
So even though we're a government office, we partner successfully with the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, Guyana's chapter, and they did a fantastic job in engaging with the school age children. And it was at all levels. We had primary, secondary, tertiary, and then we did a pilot with the nursery schools where we used puppetry
Oh.
to convey the messages, and the response was really excellent. We worked with a fantastic individual who would have did all the props. She even had little songs that she produced, and it was really responsive. And so we, with the necessary support, we would like to continue producing content for the schools. This year we foresee, in fact, we want to have our first sessions started in March and continuing throughout the year. And last year we focused on climate change. This year we want to look both at climate change and also helping the students to understand the green state and Guyana becoming green. And so we are in the final stages of finalizing our work plan and schedule to start those outreaches. And the engagement has been really fantastic from the children. And this year we're particularly proud because now we have local content. Last year we used some generic videos from the region, but we're happy that this year the materials that are going to be used are specific to Guyana. Yes.
Okay, all right, great. Still lots more to get to in a short time. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, of course, today's Conversations in State focuses on the office. Yes, I mixed them up earlier. I have to be careful to remember that it's the Office of Climate Change. And of course, I'm talking to the head of that office, Miss Janelle Christian. Now, again, as I said, there's still lots to get to, but let's talk about collaborations before we talk about anything else. And sometimes, if you talk to people, they would actually mix up climate change, the Office of Climate Change, and the Department of the Environment. Let's talk about the sort of collaborative efforts that need to occur between the Office of Climate Change and the Department of the Environment so that we can basically have successful agendas and initiatives.
Yes. Well, of course, you know, the Department of Environment was established in 2016 October, and under that agency we have about four other agencies: the EPA, Protected Air Commission, and so on. And we work with them closely in executing those common areas. Principally, that will be renewable energy. Um, and the fact that they are the agency responsible for leading the process for elaboration of a green state development strategy. The initial work when we were starting, when we did the stakeholders engagement, which would have led to and inform the GSDS framework document, we worked very closely with the Department of Environment in that regard, and we continue to do so. In fact, there is the Green Multi-Stakeholder Steering Committee, which was established by His Excellency, and the Office of Climate Change will serve as a secretariat for that process.
Okay.
It's a forum for engagement with stakeholders to receive feedback on the process and so on. We are also working with the GSDS, with the, sorry, the